Greetings, Mason Storm here. On today's episode, we're going to be making a cake, a pound cake, although I'm going to be making it in grams, so a 500 gram cake. Really easy to make, and this type of cake is the foundation for many others, so it's good to get the basics down. Okay, so we need 500 grams of butter, 500 grams of eggs, 500 grams of flour, and 500 grams of sugar. It doesn't really matter the amount of grams, as long as they're all the same. It's a ratio. Now I'm going to crack an unknown amount of eggs. I put them in the bowl and weighed them, and I have slightly more than 500 grams. I figure the shells must account for something, but here we go. Now that we have all our ingredients ready, it's time to start the mixing process. So for starters, I'm going to start beating the butter to kind of smooth it out a little bit. Now a wise person would not use butter right out of the refrigerator that's as hard as a rock. But that's what I ended up doing, so it took a lot of manual labor to kind of chip apart this butter. And probably another smart thing to do would have been just to leave it and let it warm up, but I was feeling ambitious at the time, and the wooden spoon was used to decimate the butter. So in this phase, we're looking to kind of smooth out the butter to a point that when we add the sugar, we can get a nice creamy, sugary, buttery mixture, also known as perfection. Now it's quite difficult to get a creamy mixture of butter and sugar when the butter is as cold as it is here, but try to make the best of what I've got here. It's definitely not as easy as I planned, but it's important that you work the butter as much as you can before adding the eggs. Because once you add the eggs to it, you can overbeat the eggs and that can affect the quality of the cake. Whereas overbeating the butter, not so much. I mean, it can still have a little bit of an impact, but I mean, you beat cream to make butter, so that's kind of the end stage of it. And once we're satisfied with the butter and sugar mixture, it's time to add our eggs to the mix, which I'm going to do here. Now we're going to continue mixing this, and the eggs, they're really going to help because they're going to allow the butter to kind of smooth out more and kind of creamify, which is kind of what we're looking for. And it doesn't take long for the eggs and the butter and the sugar to kind of mix together into a nice mixture of creamy, eggy, buttery, sugary goodness. And then we're going to add our last ingredient, which is our flour. Okay, now that our flour is added, time for our final mixing. And as you probably noticed in the footage, I have a little bit of clumpiness left in the butter. It's not really that big of a deal. It will kind of smooth out when it cooks. But if you have clumps of flour, that's a different case altogether. Those are disgusting after it cooks. So it's more important that you have your flour evenly dispersed than it is your butter. I mean, the butter, you kind of do what you can. I mean, if it's too cold, that's kind of, it is what it is. But flour, you really got to make sure it's mixed in properly. And once it's all starting to combine and starting to kind of hold its shape and looks like the flour is nice and distributed, it's time to move on to the next step. Well, I have a bundt pan here that I've pre-coated with some spray to make it so that my cake doesn't stick to it. In hindsight, this is probably the wrong type of pan to use. A standard square rectangular loaf pan, probably something with a lot lower maximum height value would be an ideal. The thing you got to remember with this type of cake is there's no leavening agents in it, so it won't really rise that much. So that's why I'm able to fill this pan up a lot more than I normally would, because the cake just doesn't rise very much. Pound cake is generally a very dense cake. Some other variations of the cake that don't follow the standard principles and formula of the pound cake include leavening agents such as baking powder to make the cake rise so it's not as dense. But at that point, is it really a pound cake anymore if it's not following the standard traditional recipe? Hard to say. But anyway, this type of pan, because it's so high and whatnot, it makes it very difficult to cook the cake. So having a less high pan probably makes it cook a lot easier. I mean, my cake did turn out fine, it just took forever to cook, which I guess isn't really that big of a deal. And once our cake is situated in the pan perfectly, we'll toss it in the oven, 350 degrees. I'm going to cook this for just over an hour. If you feel that your cake may not fit in the pan properly and may boil over, just stick a sheet pan in the bottom of the oven. That way your mess you'll have to clean up will be far, far smaller if worse comes to worse. Didn't happen in my case, but I was a little bit worried that it could have risen a little bit more. Now, something that was interesting about this cake, and the reason why I say you shouldn't use a bundt pan for this, is that this cake passes a toothpick test. Like, it looks like it's definitely ready, but as you're going to see in a second, when I take it out of the pan, if you look towards the center of the cake, you can see it's still kind of runny, which is kind of weird, because even using a toothpick to test the bottom of it, it still passes that as well. So it's only in like the exact middle of it that it's not quite done. So I just put the pan back on it, throw her back in the oven, give it another 10 minutes or so, and then take it out again, and then we were perfect. But something to be aware of when you try to cook a highly dense cake in a pan like this. Having a lower height and a more flat pan, I think would definitely be an ideal in what I would do next time. Either way, it turned out pretty good once it was finally done being cooked. And I did enjoy this cake. I thought it was quite good for low complexity of the construction. So let me know in the comments below if you've ever actually made a pound cake following the actual pound measurement in equal proportions. And if you like my content and would like to see more of it, please like and subscribe. And until next time, stay awesome.